The Spoken Token is a proud member of the Pod Studio One podcast network.
Hello, and welcome to the Spoken Token Podcast, episode number 94. This time, Larry and Alex continue to roll on with the Summer of Games with special guest Ryan Howard and talks all things tabletop RPG. Come along as we discuss running, participating, and hosting this wonderful form of tabletop adventuring with a real pro. So, sit back, relax, get your D20s ready to roll, and turn us up as we join our hosts, Alex Wallace and Larry Neal. Hello, everybody, and welcome into the big show. I am Larry Neal.
Hey, and I am Alex Wallace.
And we are the Spoken Token Podcast. Thanks for coming in and joining us. Alex.
Larry.
First of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Of course, you know, I wish that our listeners could hear all of the wonderful shenanigans we get into before we start rolling. But you know what?
We've got a guest in the house.
We got a guest in the house. So I was not on my best behavior. So guest, I do apologize for my tomfoolery, if you will.
It was the true Alex, that's for sure.
Larry has threatened to beat me up at least twice in the last 15 minutes.
Well, that's not new to the listeners. So.
This is true.
I don't like our relationship, Larry. It's toxic.
So let's do this. Since we've got a guest in the house, I know we normally kind of catch up with each other, but let's go on and get the guest in here since he's sitting here with us. Guest, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are.
Hello, everyone out there. My name is Ryan Howard. I am the host of Rollin Bones with Ryan Howard. I am a huge fan of Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. And on my show, I review games and interview different content creators within the RPG space, be they other YouTubers and podcasters or game creators. That's typically the space that I live in with my show, though, but I am glad to be here today with you guys on The Spoken Token because I'm never the guest. I'm always the host.
How about that?
It's true. It's true.
And so that kind of gives it away about what we're going to talk about today because, you know, we got a source like this with us. We definitely can't waste it. We got to talk
I know.
tabletop
I'm
RPGs.
so excited. And I know I've said this to Ryan to his face, but I'm going to tell our listeners, I kind of fanboy a little bit with Ryan. Larry and I have had an opportunity to do some role-playing with him. My man is, wow. I mean, so I don't necessarily...
From the very first interaction.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah. This guy's got it together.
This is going to be cool.
And so, I mean, I don't want to hijack this, Larry, but I will say this. So my day job is actually a theater teacher. Mm-hmm. So, and have you ever had any kind of acting training?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
It's funny that you mentioned being a theater teacher. Theater was very much kind of my entryway into role-playing because, I mean, growing up, I was always into comic books, into video games, all the nerdy stuff that people get into. And so, by extension, I always thought that Dungeons & Dragons would be interesting to me and that it would line up with the stuff that I was interested in. I just didn't know anyone who played. Mm-hmm. And also, one time I accidentally brought it up in front of my mom. And
fun times.
Mom thought, up until the day that I went to play in my first session when I was 19 years old, that Dungeons & Dragons was the devil's game.
Yeah.
And I don't know, my mom never went in for any of the satanic panic stuff around like music or movies or anything. But for some reason, D&D was the devil's game, and I've never cornered her on that. Mm-hmm. But
have you ever like done a one-shot role-playing game where you actually have that conversation with your mother and then you roll for her like an NPC or something?
No, I haven't, but I have gotten my mom to play in one of my games before.
That is phenomenal. How did that go?
She was not as into it as everyone else at the table was. She wasn't opposed to it.
Okay.
It just wasn't really her thing.
Sure.
But we can talk about that a little bit later as far as how that game went, because that was a game with my entire family at the table.
And I want to do that. That's one of the things
absolutely.
for my birthday gift that they told me they were going to do. We just haven't gotten it together.
Have Ryan talk about his family game?
No, play with my family too.
Okay. So sorry.
That's a really cool thing because you have to stop and think about it. What you're doing in role playing and how how easy it is. I guess I can't really. Everyone may not find it easy, but you kind of can get into it if you sit down with a group of people, or if you get to know them. Once people start playing, you can get into it. Now think about doing it with your family.
Yep.
Yeah.
With your siblings and your parents or kids, and saying seriously, not a, hey, okay, Junior, we're playing a kiddie. No, we're going to sit down and play. That's it's a pretty heavy thought. That's pretty cool though.
Yeah, and as someone who like role playing is literally, I would, say it is your life. This is because it's what you spend a majority of your time thinking about, speaking about, engaging with. And on a serious note, like it's so interesting. How have you combated that stigma of Dungeons and Dragons being, the devil's game, or have you, or how do you educate people, if you run up against that?
Typically what I tell people when it comes to role playing, all you're doing is sitting at a table with friends and you're collaborating in telling a story.
Right.
You're playing a game, but you're more than anything telling a story with your friends. And so all you're doing is just rolling dice to determine outcomes, the same way that if I pick up this water bottle that's sitting on the table here, there's a small chance that I might, break my wrist picking this thing up. But the dice roll would represent performing an action, especially under duress. So basically I just tell people it's you and your friends kind of, living in a world that you guys affect with your decisions, that's created by each of you individually at the table together. And usually when you explain it that way, all the connotations of the Satanism stuff from the 80s just kind of goes away, because there are devils and demons in Dungeons and Dragons, but for the most part you're killing them.
Yeah, well, and also too, for me, it's akin to like we allow video games to be pervasive.
Yeah.
And how many times are you, someone is fighting something otherworldly and all of this?
Right.
And I really think it just was this. There is a group of people, particularly who were coming of age and or adults in the 80s, that when it was unknown, it was something new, and they, it had any type of, parallel connection to, satanic something or other. They're just like, oh, well, we have to completely ban it, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, that whole period of time is really interesting. I've not done as much study on it as I would like to, because I like history. But I read a little bit on it maybe about when we started the show. Just out of curiosity, something came up. Because I'd heard only a little bit about that, because I lived through that. But I wasn't really playing tabletop RPGs back then. We were more just doing board games and then we're playing outside or whatever. But I knew about D&D, and I knew about that. And even though I remember it, some of the comments went over my head about the satanic stuff. And I remember being old enough to know what that means, but looking at a game going, whatever, and not paying attention. So as an adult, I looked at it, and we probably should dive into it. This would have been a good chance to really dive into it. It's a very fascinating period of history. The reasons behind why it started and who started really kind of, at least from what I saw, it's not totally clear. It's one of those things where somebody stood up in a crowd and just said fire, and then everybody's running from a fire.
Yep.
That's really kind of what it was like. You didn't stop to look and see if there really was a fire. You just yelled fire too and took off running, and there was no fire. Yeah. But it almost, I think one of the testaments to how good tabletop role-playing is the fact that, it survived that.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that kind of a movement would have killed a lot of other things. Because, parents would, they didn't want to hear it. You couldn't discuss it with them.
Well, and actually, it came out of specifically like that late 70s hysteria over particular like metal bands. And then so they were seen to, those two things were to overlap, because the same people who were listening to Gwar and Alice Cooper and all of that, which granted, some of those people were trying to push the envelope, and they were trying to elicit a response so they could sell records.
Absolutely.
But then the same circles who were buying that material were also, buying Gary Gygax's stuff. And then, so therefore they're like, oh, and then you see the word demon or devil or something, even if, like you say, Ryan, it was something, it was fodder for your axe.
Yep.
You know,
man,
but
they ran
but then
the
again, you
hills,
have
yeah.
the participation of magic and all of this kind of stuff. So
And culturally, it seems like every decade there's some kind of great moral panic that happens in society. In the 50s, you had this book by Frederick Wortham called Seduction of the Innocents about how comic books were causing juvenile delinquency.
Yep.
And then in the 60s, in the aftermath of Charles Manson and, writing Helter Skelter and Blood on the Wall, you've got people going, well, what are the Beatles saying?
right.
And then, in the 70s and 80s, you've got the PMRC, you've got those whole censorship trials with the metal bands,
And
where
then in the
D.
90s
Snyder's brought up in front of Congress. D&D is lumped into that because you've got this whole worry about Satanism in the 80s.
Yep.
In the 90s, you've got violent video games after Columbine and rap music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it just goes on. And I can't really think of what the one in the 2000s was. I think
Do you
video games
remember
came back
when? Do you
around.
remember when Gladiator came out in '99 and everyone was like, "This was the most." It was The Matrix in '98. It was the summer. No, it was the summer of '99. The Matrix came out, and people were like, "This is the most violent thing anyone has ever seen ever." And then Gladiator came out and like, "Oh my gosh, this is the most violent thing." And now we watch those, and we're like, "Oh, okay, So
Saw something on CBS last night that's worse than both. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, you and your NCSI, it's horrible.
Oh man, that's so good. It's NCIS, by the way. You said SI.
Oh, CSI, excuse me. Aren't they like all the same? They just have different people from the 80s as their hosts. Isn't Ted Danson in one of those?
No.
Yep, he's on CSI. He's on the original CSI.
CSI, not NCIS. So no.
Excuse me. So sorry.
So moving on to another question, really good questions. So what would be your pitch? This is kind of good coming in from this. What would be your pitch to new players of tabletop RPGs? Not necessarily that they were, against it, but hey, this guy's coming to you saying, I'm brand new and I want to start playing. How would you pitch that to him? What are the virtues?
So I would say the virtues are you are only limited by what the dice say and what your imagination can come up with. And this is both terrifying and wonderful at the same time because, a new player will come in and they'll say, what do I do? And as the dungeon master, you go, well, what do you want to do? But
yes,
basically it is complete and total freedom of imagination. Imagine the greatest video game with the best story and the most fantastic graphics, only there's no restraints on what can and cannot be done because there's no programming. It's all just human brains interacting with each other.
Yeah. I love that. Well, because everything is actually, even if you're a DM who spent 40 hours, crafting this deep campaign and story, everything is created in the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, and one of the things that I love about role playing, whether it's D&D or Starfinder or Lancer or Star Wars or there are thousands of worlds that have been created, but the story is created in the moment, just as in improv. The art form of improv is like that story is created in the moment. You have a push, but the collective of the group. I picture it as. Instead, at a video game, the point of contact is the player is kind of right there at the monitor. Whatever is showing that's where the story happens.
Yeah,
and so you have a little bit of interaction. But when it's in a role playing session, the story, the point of contact is in the center of the table because you have 4 or 5 people all putting ideas together, and it's formed right there in the middle. That's a really visual thing. It's probably profound to like one person. Everybody else is like, I ain't got no idea what he's talking about. So, but again, everyone has a hand in it.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned improv because that's one of the things D&D, much like improv, is built on yes and.
Yes and.
Or if you're the dungeon master, yes but. That's very important.
I love it.
Yeah.
There does have to be consequences for the actions that are taken at the table, and that's where yes but comes in.
Yeah. And I think so in kind of working off of that, as a DM, what are some things to encourage for someone a newer DM, or even and for my grandmother who's listening, DM is the dungeon master or the game master for GM. If you don't like the scary term dungeon,
or the battle master in Mech Warrior.
Oh, the battle master, but they all have master, so they could be like a ship captain too.
Go figure.
This is true. But what are some things to avoid? Some things to encourage for someone who's starting out as a DM, GM, BM. BM. It sounds like bowel movement. I'm a BM. That's what Mech Warrior does for you, Larry.
Thanks for that image.
I'm sure that'll hit the cutting room floor. So, Ryan.
So as far as what I would encourage players to do is make a character that you can very easily kind of put yourself into, because you're going to get the most out of the game if you are able to think of what's happening at the table is not happening to a character or someone else, but is happening to you.
So as a GM, you're suggesting that they put themselves through what they've created beforehand,
Yes.
or in the moment.
Well, both.
Okay, I've never thought about that. That's wise sage Ryan. Please, what other wisdoms do you have? That was really cool. That's a great piece of advice.
Yes.
As far as what to avoid, really, if you're just starting out, I'd say don't be afraid to try anything. There are certain behaviors that, if they continue at the table, can be a problem. Like if you've got someone who consistently, every time you get to a town, they go, I'm going to walk up to the first guard that I see and punch him in the face. That's going to be a problem for the rest of the party.
Yeah.
So the one thing I'd say avoiding as a new role player is anything that would cause undue harm to the other players at the table or the other characters at the table, just so you're not ruining someone else's fun.
We talk about that a lot here on the show, about just be aware of the other people at the table.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because once it becomes all about you, then it ceases to be fun for the whole group.
Right. Because what you talked about earlier in terms of it being a group narrative, I mean, that breaks that because it really and truly is. And so I guess that's one of the things, too, you need to understand. If you're agreeing to sit down and play a role-playing game, that is what you're agreeing to do. Yep. You're not agreeing to sit down at the table and play spoiler all the time or do your own story. You have agreed to say, okay, everybody at the group, DM, other players, let's tell a story together. Yeah. So, no, that's very well done. Why are you looking at me like that?
I'm just, I love you. That's why. So I have my reasons, but no. Well, then what would you say to a game master or a DM for someone who is very me focused? So like, because again, some people just do it out of ignorance. They like, I don't necessarily know how to do this, so therefore the only thing I know to do is play a single player game. Yep. So how would you as a GM encourage a more group experience?
Basically, what I would do at that point, if a player's behavior is continuing to hurt the rest of the party, what I would do is pull that player aside and say, "Hey, look," especially if they're new, I'd say, "Hey, you're new, or maybe you don't know you're doing this, but every time you do this thing, Larry starts to stack his dice up to see if he can make a tower." And
so I'm not the only one that does that?
No, I love doing that.
Oh yeah,
I did it earlier.
Is that a very clear sign?
Yes, that is
universal sign for I'm out.
That is the I'm playing a barbarian and we're spending way too much time haggling with the shopkeeper pose. But
love it.
Larry's stacking his dice because he's bored, and every time you do this, Alex rolls his eyes because you're really getting on his nerves and you're really kind of stealing his thunder. So just so you're aware of this, we're all a little bit annoyed with this behavior, me especially, because we have to keep going back and forth as player and dungeon master. So can you tone it down like 3 notches?
Wow, you're a whole lot more direct than I would be. I'd come in like, so how's it going? Are you having fun? I'm very anti-confrontational.
Very, very,
except
very
if I was a
good.
GM, then it's like, oh yeah, you stepped on mine, and you're blown up. So sorry.
Oh yeah.
So let's see. Well, let me do this. You've kind of stepped on a couple of, well, not stepped on, but touched on a few things. But I do want to ask you this. What would you say if you were talking to, it kind of goes with the last question I asked you, lifelong board gamers who, hardcore board gamers is what they play.
Mhm.
And they're coming to you and saying, well, now I want to get into the tabletop, maybe RPG. So they're not coming to the whole hobby new. They've been playing board games.
Yeah.
But now there's going to be a difference. What's your advice to them for that in terms of getting prepared to go from rolling dice for a board game to an RPG?
So when it comes to board gamers, and you guys can let me know if I'm right or wrong about this, a lot of board gaming is very dependent on the structure of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much, within this given rule structure, you can do this, this, and this.
Yep.
In a role-playing game, that rule structure is very much in the background. Some games kind of bring it forward a little bit more. There are games with a lot of crunch. Pathfinder and Starfinder, that's one where some of the mechanics come out a little bit more. But a good players and good dungeon masters are able to make all of that kind of fade in the background. And so it's a lot more openness, a lot more freedom. Instead of I can do, like, I've got this card here that says I can do these 3 actions when my turn comes up. You have a lot more range of options when it comes to what you can do.
And I think for me, one of the things that I found when I went from, because I wanted a D&D experience, so I went all into Wrath of Ashardalon and Castle Ravenloft and Legend of Drizzt.
And I love those, but it ain't there.
You're right, and so and again, because I was like, well, because I didn't have a role playing group, but this is D&D, it's a board game. Yeah. It's going to give me that unique story that I helped to create, but it wasn't there.
Right.
It's like you level up once, and then you kind of go through, and there's a little bit of randomization. But you're right; it's all mechanics.
Yep.
Whereas role playing is less about the mechanics are a means to an end. In a game, they are the end. Like the mechanic is what the game is built on, but the role playing is what happens to your character. Like the story is the end goal, and all of those things. Yeah. All the rules just support you getting there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. And that's why I like I think role playing for me is so exciting because I love great stories.
Well, yeah.
Great stories.
Well, yeah.
So, all right, in that vein, I want to hear I don't know what's real, true or not, so you can make this up if you wanted to. But like, what's your favorite arc you've ever been a part of, like story arc?
So my favorite arc, and I'm going to go ahead and put this out here, no offense to any of the other groups that I've played with.
If it makes you feel any better, I'm sure none of them are listening to us.
Fair enough.
Because right now it's just Larry.
Well, he's here, so maybe they are.
That's true. That's true. You may our listener base is jumped to like 12 people now because you're here. So
awesome. Glad I could bring that dozen people.
That's
here.
right. Yes, because we were at 0 before that.
My 12 disciples.
Yes. Okay, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
So my favorite role playing arc that I was a part of was my very first one, both as a player and as a dungeon master, because these were 2 campaigns that I was in college, and they fit together. Because we started the one campaign, my original DM Muhammad, he was running us through this campaign world that he came up with, and about halfway through his campaign, I started one of my own that was a prequel to his.
Oh, cool.
And so they fed into each other. But in the part that I was playing a character named Cromwell McGwen, who I always describe as Aragorn Kenobi. Because he was very much those two. He was Strider meets Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Oh
and
my gosh.
Love it.
Was this so Ewan McGregor, Obi-Wan Kenobi,
yes.
or
Ewan
Guinness?
Ewan McGregor,
Okay,
Obi-Wan
all right,
Kenobi.
All right, fair enough.
The one we got to see really fight.
Yeah, that's true.
But he was the rangeriest ranger to ever ranger. He was deposed royalty.
Oh, gosh.
Like wandering the wilderness.
What was your pet? Was it a bear or a cat?
I didn't have a pet. Because I was playing a hunter ranger, not a beastmaster.
Got it. All right, fair enough.
But this campaign went from, there were only 2 players in the beginning, and I was one of them. I was the only player who was there from session 1 all the way to the end. So inadvertently, the game kind of became my story accidentally.
Yeah.
that's one of the role-playing faux pas is no character is the main character.
Right.
Right.
But throughout the course of the story, we went to the city that was run by 6 dragons that had just kind of pooled their resources together.
So they were hoarder dragons.
Yes.
Coupons and all that kind of stuff too.
But it was a very tenuous alliance that this city was built around. So from the beginning, it was a powder keg, and of course, it exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
And by the end of it, these dragons had fused together into Tiamat, which, if you've seen the Magic the Gathering set, I'm sure there's a Tiamat card.
Oh yeah. Well, and even actually, Tiamat was, he's been around for such a long time.
Yeah,
and
even I know that.
Yeah, he's such an iconic character in the Dungeons and Dragons lore.
So we get down to that last fight. It's us at 20th level. We were playing for 3 years. We did this campaign. Us at 20th level. We go into the stronghold that Tiamat has taken over. And as we're about to start the fight, one of the players reveals that for the past month of sessions, she had been turning herself into a lich, an undead sorceress, and she turned on us. And then one of the other players turned on us, and then another. And so it was me and 2 other players against the other players at the table, just inadvertently, unplanned. And the thing about this, why this resonates with me so much, is my favorite memory of an RPG campaign. I was so into this character at this point. I've been playing Cromwell for 3 years.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, I was Cromwell McGuinn.
Yes, sir.
And I had just been betrayed by my best friends. I was in real life upset.
Oh, I bet.
In the moment, and it took some reflection, but what it made me realize was the fact that I took this so personally, the fact that I was this invested in the game, that is a good thing.
Absolutely.
And so that will forever stick with me. That was the moment where I knew this was a lifelong love that I had developed for this game.
Yeah. I think, so real quickly, my role-playing high was the first time I actually ever played. And so that was, I had been married probably 6 months. And again, I'd always wanted to be in D&D, and I never got it. So, but I found somebody online, back when, comic stores had message boards. And so pre-Facebook, I guess Facebook was still in its infancy. But so I went to this group's house. They usually met for 6 hours. They played once a month. Mm-hmm. And my first session, they started me in I was level 15 or whatever.
Wow.
And it's just so I made a rogue, an assassin, and we had been playing for 6 hours, and we were in this final battle with this dragon, and I run up to it to try and sneak attack it, and it kills me. and I'm like, oh no! But then I look at my character sheet and I go, I have this thing called sleight of hand, and I have a health potion. Can I use that? And the DM's like, yes, yes, you can. But so he made the roll was really high because it was a really difficult thing. I nailed it. So I stabilized myself, but I kind of laid there dead. And they all kind of went around, and they were all just kind of fallen, and everybody had used up everything that they had. And I go, so I had 1 or 2 health left, and he's like, okay, this is probably your last roll. So I guess I'll just roll a sneak attack. So I rolled nat 20. So then the way that I had built it, I ended up rolling something like 16d6 because it was one of those that kept going on. By the end of it, I had done, I did so much damage, it actually finished it off. And I mean, everybody at the table, every time I rolled, it was like, ah! and just at the end of it, the high was almost like nothing I had ever felt before. Yeah. Because of just, the randomness of the dice roll, but how invested everybody was. Because again, this was life or death for their so much of who they were, because the hours that they had put into these characters, and and the thought, just like you're for all intents and purposes, they had been those people.
Yep. Right. Well, okay, I guess I'll go next. So mine was really the first game also, and it was Pathfinder, and Mike ran it for us.
I'm really sad that your favorite role-playing session is not when we did our Christmas role play.
So, moving on. So, I had written my backstory, and I'm an elf, and I've got a long hatred outside of tabletop RPGs of elves.
Mhm.
I mean, not elves, but orcs.
Yeah.
So my elf character, of course, had that. And Mike knew this too. And this is where him being the DS, being friends outside, he kind of knew, and he's looking. He's like, "You sure you want to do that?" I'm like, "Yeah." So the first combat we come up to, this guy, he gets the drop on my brother and the other character, and he's got him pretty bad. So I just rush in, and he's like, "You sure you want to do that?" I'm like, "Yeah." So he's like, "Okay, roll." I go in, and with the way I built him with the anger and stuff, I get a pretty high roll, and he's like, "Okay, so you lopped the guy's head off." And they were like, "Oh my God, it's great." So about the third combat, it comes through, and he's the whole time he's looking at me.
Mhm.
He's like, and you know how he does. He's looking.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
like, So the third time I go, and he's like, "Well, before you do that roll," he gave me a roll. So, so he ended up enchanting me that put a fear on me that just made me run at my top speed for like the next 4 or 5 turns. So I'm so far away in the map now. When they run into a dragon, I'm like, "Dude, we need you." So finally it wears off. I get back, and we're fighting a baby dragon. I think it was copper, I believe. It wasn't fully grown, but it was bigger than us because it was a dragon.
Mhm.
I'm just coming back in, and I don't have many hit points left because I got attacked a few times while I was just running in fear, just running out of my mind. So Mike's kind of feeling pretty good about it. And so my brother, the last thing he's got, he's like, "Only thing I have left is a spell of embiggen." And I'm like, "Can he cast it on me?" And Mike's looking, and he's like, "I see what you're yeah. Yeah, but I don't, okay." So my brother casts it, and it hits. And he's like, "Okay, it's a baby dragon, so yeah, now you're as big as a dragon." My weapon was gone. He said, "What are you going to do?" But I had a charge attack. I'm like, "I'll charge it." And it was something crazy like a 17 or 18. And they were both almost on death's door too. And this was the last thing. So I charged the thing, nat 20. It's like, "So you stunned a dragon with no weapons?"
Yep.
He's like, "Oh my God, this is crazy." So I scooped them up, and we get out, and it's the same thing. We're just sitting there like, "Oh my God, that was the craziest thing." And he's like, "You earned that." Because I was trying not to give it to you. He said, "I knew what you were doing. Every orc you saw, you were just going to go berserk." And I'm like, "I got something for that." He was like, "I don't think I've ever seen anybody charging a dragon with no weapons." I'm like, "Well, I was as big as he was. What else was I going to do?" And that's what gave me the bug. I mean, we wanted to do it beforehand, but it's the same thing. I mean, we're just sitting at the table looking at each other like, "What just happened? That is so cool." And Mike was the DM, he's in it too. He's like, "That's crazy." I'm sitting here thinking, I gotta stop it. So like you, came a little bit later. I wasn't 19, but at that point I'm like, yeah, role playing is okay. I need to look into this. This is my jam. This was fantastic.
And our mutual friend Mike, Shag, as he's known at our table, he's really good at creating moments like that. I played in a game of his. I was playing this warlock who had basically, I'd made my pact for power with an enchanted sword. And I had this whole backstory of how the sword had like guided me through my childhood and forced me to pick fights that it knew I couldn't win just to toughen me up. The way that Mike's mind works, the main antagonist of the story was like his spirit was in the blade that had been influencing me throughout my entire life.
Yeah,
and when I found that out, I was like, "Wait a minute."
Yes, that is
And I think
fantastic.
that's one of the things that all role playing does well is it taps into our human love for stories.
Yeah.
And character arcs and growth. And again, it's just that's all these books and dice are an interactive story. We are creating the narrative as we write. And some of the best DMs and GMs are people who naturally are gifted or inclined to storytelling. And so, all right, so I have a question for you. After we kind of talk about this, how do you, as a GM or DM, how do you handle player failure?
So there's a guy out there named Matt Colville who makes some fantastic videos about how to run role-playing games. And one of the things that he talks about is failing forward. Because the worst situation in the world is the bandits got away, we need to track them, the ranger steps up and goes, I have a +8 to tracking people, and then he rolls a 1.
Ooh.
And so, obviously at that point, you don't see the tracks.
Yeah, you actually fall and break your nose.
Yeah, and then someone else is like, oh, I've got a little bit of survival, let me roll. They roll like a 3.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, everyone's just kind of walking around going, where do we go? Where do we go from here? You don't want to do that. And so the way to avoid that is failing forward. And the example that Matt Colville uses is the opening scene to Raiders of the Lost Ark. When Indy is leaving the dungeon, the tomb that he's in, when he jumps, he is failing that athletics check to jump that chasm. So he catches himself on that root. Well, because he failed, the root slips.
Right.
And so he's hanging there. He failed those checks. Now he has to climb up. And it takes a while, and it makes everything that happens after that much more difficult because of those failures. But it still results in Indiana Jones getting out of the temple just with a few major setbacks along the way.
So then what, I love that. That's brilliant. What is your personal feeling on actual, character permadeath? So, so for those of you who are not fully versed in the role-playing vernacular, permadeath is when your created character dies and cannot be revived, resuscitated, or come back to the game and is forever in the annals of history deceased.
Yeah, so while we've talked a lot about being super invested in your characters, and that's a very beautiful and wonderful thing. However, when it comes to death, if you're not willing to pay the price for a resurrection spell, or you just don't have access to something like that in the game, players need to learn to let go of their characters, because if your GM is doing it right, death is a consequence of actions that you performed yourself.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it's so. I personally think character. When I say character, I mean the person you've created. Their death needs to be a very real possibility.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
the stakes of what you are doing become that much more dire and interesting to everyone at the table.
Yeah, there's a big debate/conversation going on in the role-playing world right now about the way modern games make it very difficult to die. So 5th edition D&D, the current edition, at first level, you are pretty powerful. People have said that in D&D 5th edition, you're going from hero to superhero, whereas in traditional role-playing games, you're going from farmer to hero.
Yeah.
And it's the drama of the thing, the possibility that everyone at this table is not going to make it out alive.
Right.
That is what makes the story interesting. That's where the investment comes from. And when you do make it out alive, that's where that sense of accomplishment and pride and relief comes from. Because if there's not a good chance that your character is going to die, where are the stakes?
Yeah.
What's
Right.
there to make you care about what's going on at the table?
Well, and then in your decision making, you were always you're min maxing every decision.
Yes,
You're like,
absolutely.
I'm just gonna. I'll survive this. Well, I'm gonna do this. You never make logical choices.
Right. And I think it actually pulls you out of the immersion too.
Yeah.
It does.
Because if you're not taking it serious, if you're not worried about it, then the stakes as they've been set forth in the narrative that you're trying to tell, they don't matter. So it's like, whatever. It's like we're over here because we need to find out what we need to know from this person to go to the next person. You're like, I don't care about that. I'm going to be over here doing this thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, what are you doing? But again, I get it. Yeah. If you don't, I don't think I've ever played a game where I understood that that we possibly would not have died. I mean, Mike was clear with us on that first one. He was like, if you die, you're dead.
Yes.
And of course, another thing, even though we had created the characters' backstories well ahead of time, we didn't roll those characters. That was a session where we rolled them at the table. So we didn't roll them until we got there. So I didn't really get to, quote unquote, get to know that character until that session.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't have been bummed, if we had died right then and there. But at the first session, I wouldn't have been anywhere near as connected as I would be, like, say, if we went back to that now.
Yep.
Or if I played it now. So I guess that has a bit to do with it too, in terms of being a GM, in terms of, you don't really want to kill them off. Maybe that first time. It may not be that meaningful to them, the specter of it. Because it's like, I just made the guy. I don't care.
Yeah.
But after he's played it, 7 hours, 8, 9 hours, 2 or 3 sessions, it's like, oh, okay, no, what are we doing? Hold on, let me get my notepad.
Yeah.
What happened? I do not want to die tonight.
Right.
Yeah, there's a common kind of saying in role playing about dungeon masters, but this applies to players as well. If you want a world where every character makes the decision you want them to make, write a fantasy novel. And so if you want to completely dictate the outcome of your specific character, where they ultimately end up, write a fantasy novel.
Good.
I love
quote.
that. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, because just
quote.
as a character has to hold on loosely to their creation, so even more so does the GM. Because one of the things when I first tried to GM, I don't even remember what it was, but I wrote this deep, long narrative. Like, okay, then we're gonna go this and do this, and then this, and this, and this. I think it's for Star Wars when we did Edge of the Empire.
Oh, that was so good.
Edge of the Empire. And so I had this whole
And I loved my story for that.
Oh yeah, and I would love to, oh my gosh, that's one of my favorite systems outside of Lancer. And I'm going to ask you that question next. Prep favorite systems. But what I found is that at every turn, my table, they were going in their own direction.
Yep.
And so it dawned on me, it's like, oh, a GM, my job is to present them with a situation. They then use what they know and have to problem solve. And then when they come up with something that I haven't thought of, I have to have the wit to step in and provide them with the appropriate test or interaction that would, again, like you said, fail forward or even push the narrative forward. But what I found, at first it was frustrating, but then I found the freedom of like, oh, if I have point A and point C, point B, they don't know what point B is.
Right.
And so if they go, if I think they're going to go through this door and interact with this people, but then they go around the back, I can still have point B be right there. I just have to change a few of the details.
Yep.
And I found that really freeing to let go of my giant story arc and go, okay, they need to have some level of autonomy and ownership in this.
Yep. Yeah, when it comes to setting up the story of a campaign from the Dungeon Master's perspective, the best thought exercise you can do is, what would happen if no one intervened here? What if there were no players? I'll use the same character that I used on a different podcast, just as an example. You have the evil king, Sarkhan the One-Eyed. He has his eyes on the village across the river.
No, he has his eye.
He has his eye. That is correct. He has his eye on the village across the river. He's going to march his soldiers over there, and he is going to take over that village. If no one intervenes, he will dominate that village. He will subjugate the people, and he will continue his string of domination on down until he rules the entire fiefdom, kingdom, whatever it is you have set up there. So the players come in. When the players enter, Sarkhan the One-Eyed has this plan. I'm going to cross the river and I'm going to siege that village. How do the players interact with that, and how does their interaction change the outcome that otherwise would have been King Sarkhan becomes ruler of all of the lands because no one stepped up to stop him?
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
no, that's fantastic. Right quick before you get in there, DM or player character, which one is your favorite to do?
Honestly, at this point, I got to say DM, just because I'm always DMing. I very rarely get the chance to play. I'm actually excited because one of my campaigns just ended, and one of my players from that campaign is about to run a game, so I get to play.
Very cool.
But I like building those worlds and seeing what other people do in the worlds that I build. I really like DMing, so I think I do prefer it over playing.
Super cool.
Okay, so top 3 favorite systems. So when I say, for those uninitiated, a system is a particular rule set and created world And there are flavors from, even just on our table, we have Star Wars, the 30th edition. We have Starfinder. We have Lancer. There is, there's a My Little Pony. There's a G.I. Joe one coming out soon. There's Marvel. There's if there's a favorite IP or license, there's probably a role playing.
And there's even a system out there where I should have brought that book. I forgot I had that one too. GURPS.
Oh, GURPS. Yeah, GURPS. Absolutely.
Where you can add any IP onto it. It's a generic
absolutely.
system design. So
but
yeah.
But what's your favorite? I guess system / so I'm total package. Whatever is there.
Yeah. So I'll go with. First of all, I'm going to take Dungeons and Dragons off the table because Stu Horvath from the Vintage RPG podcast said this to me best. Dungeons and Dragons is blue jeans. It never goes out of style. It's always there. It's always comfortable. So that's kind of like above favorites. And I play a lot of D&D 5e. Favorite fantasy system, though, is a system called Dungeon Crawl Classics.
I have actually played that at like 2 or 3 sessions, but I think it was the post-apocalyptic version.
Oh yeah, Mutant Crawl Classics.
Yes,
that's very good as well. But for anyone who doesn't know about Dungeon Crawl Classics, it is like old school, original D&D or first edition D&D, but there's this awesome mechanic where spellcasters can burn physical stats to boost their spells. So you have to roll to cast a spell, and if you roll low or you don't roll as high on the spellcasting table as you want, you can like burn part of your strength. And flavor-wise, it's like you're cutting your hand to make yourself bleed to boost your power. It's filled with all kinds of like gritty flavor, and it very much feels like you're playing like a Robert E. Howard story in a lot of ways.
Very cool.
All right, so that's one. What's your? Do you have? Give me 2 more down the list.
Okay, so my favorite. Larry mentioned GURPS, so I want to mention my favorite kind of agnostic system, which also has one of my favorite settings in it, Savage Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And what's cool about Savage Worlds is you have dice, but you also determine turn order with cards. So instead of rolling initiative, the DM pulls out a deck of cards and deals cards to everyone, and you go ace to deuce. And your skills are all kind of dice-based, but within that, there's a game called Deadlands, which is a Weird West game. Basically, it's the Wild West, but the Civil War lasted up through like 1878. And because of that, and because of this thing called Ghost Rock, which is like haunted coal, basically, there's all kinds of weird steampunk technology, and there's all kinds of weird monsters running around. And super weird stuff happened, like the San Andreas Fault shattered Los Angeles into like a series of different islands. There's a fort in Nevada called Fort 51 that's run by Thomas Edison, but he's gone insane.
This is my new favorite thing of all time.
Oh yeah,
because Weird West is my absolute favorite.
Now, is this a setting in Savage Worlds?
yes, it's a setting in the Savage Worlds
But
system.
Weird West stuff is my absolute favorite setting of anything, and I'm buying it right now.
Gotcha.
I may never play with anyone ever,
Number
but
3.
I
So
will have it.
hold off on buying it because there's. I'll talk with you
Okay.
Help
offline
him.
about
Help
that.
him.
All right.
Number 3, though. I'm loving this list so far.
But number 3, I think my third favorite game system would probably be. You know what? Honestly, Starfinder is pretty cool as far as sci-fi systems go, and this is something I'm brand new to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'd never even played Pathfinder before. I was kind of strictly a D&D guy.
Wow. Okay.
But Starfinder is the crunch makes a lot of sense in kind of a sci-fi setting because there's lots of interfacing with computers and lots of crazy moving parts and ships and stuff like that.
Right.
But Starfinder, I feel very immersed in the sci-fi world of Starfinder. It's really fun. I really enjoy playing that particular system.
Okay.
Super cool.
All right,
super
so Larry, same question to you. What's your favorite? Give me 1 or 2 systems.
cool. Oh, wow. Well, yeah, because like all the ones I've played are on the table. I left one. The one from Renegade.
what was it? Which one was that? That was the
Overlight.
Overlight. Yeah, that was an interesting. If you haven't played that, it's really lots of evocative imagery in that one.
Yeah.
So Overlight, it's pretty
System
interesting.
wise, it's close to Lancer, other than the difference between Lancer has a break with the character and the mech.
Yeah.
There's no mech, but in terms of it being much more narrative, Overlight's kind of the same way. So I mean, other than obviously we're not using D&D, I guess Pathfinder should be on the list. But if we do, that takes out my number one. My favorite one would be Pathfinder, even though Starfinder's on the table. I've got the beginner box to regular Pathfinder. I do own 2E actually, but it's digital. I don't own a physical book of 2E. That's why I bought the physical one of Starfinder, so that I would have one of them physically. Edge of the Empire, the Fantasy Flight one. That system was fantastic. I enjoyed it. Where they took Star Wars and they broke it down, the epochs, into 3 different systems. Edge of the Empire
is all the outer rim stuff. So I guess go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's fine. I was going to say in the time frame too, because there weren't any force powers. You could be force sensitive in that one.
Yep.
But in the next one, and as you go down through them, I forget what the name.
So it's Edge of the Empire, then it's the Age of Rebellion, and then it's Force and Destiny.
Yep.
So not only do they do it, actually all 3 of them run concurrent, but what the way that they break them down, Edge of the Empire is Outer Rim, so it's more of a if you wanted to be Han Solo. That kind of jazz.
Yeah, Corellia and all that stuff.
Right. So it's, you deal with the Empire a little bit, but you want to be a smuggler. You want to do kind of the low stakes, not super powerful, more grounded stuff. Age of Rebellion is specific to the actual core conflict of the rebellion versus the Empire. Yep. And so so in Edge of Empire, you have a Force sensitive. Age of Rebellion, if you meet a Jedi, they're not ubiquitous, but they are. But you're like, okay, and so eventually you could get to someone who has a small command of the Force, but ultimately you're playing soldiers and politicians, and that kind of thing. And then the third one is Force and Destiny, and it's full on Jedi, versus Sith and all of that kind of stuff. So, and again, you mentioned something earlier that I think is really. I'd actually like to kind of deconstruct this with you, but in those 3 systems, the idea is that one of them you're playing normal person to hero. The Age of the Empire, you're playing hero to basically legend, and then in Force and Destiny, it's hero to superhero. Yeah, and so it's just kind of like does that. But what do you think? Do you think modern video games and movies have influenced the trend to what D&D 5e is doing, that hero to superhero thing, or what do you think? What's the catalyst for that?
Yeah, for some reason they're in kind of broader media. You see this a lot in Marvel movies. There's this allergic reaction to heroes being in any kind of imminent peril or danger. Think about Avengers Endgame versus something like Die Hard. And I know one is set in a modern office building with just regular human beings, and the other one's...
Endgame is in modern office building?
It's a great Christmas movie.
But then the other... Endgame, superheroes fighting for the fate of the universe.
Right.
But I never felt that there was I never felt the impact of any of the injury or anything that was happening to the characters in Endgame, whereas in Die Hard, John McClane goes to hell and back.
Every time he steps on glass.
Yeah.
Oof.
and keeps running.
It's the same thing in the Rambo movies, or at least the first 2 Rambo movies, especially First Blood. It's the same thing in Raiders of the Lost Ark. There are moments where the hero is in danger. There are moments where the hero gets hurt and has to fight through the pain to ultimately succeed. Another great example of this is Escape from New York. By the end of that movie, Snake Plissken is almost dead from the disease they put him in. He has a broken leg. He's basically like limping out of New York with the president and the briefcase that the president had. And that's the way I like to think about heroes leaving an adventure in D&D. Someone's got to be holding their arm. Someone has to be carrying someone else's unconscious body. if you don't have that, there's almost a sense that did you really do anything?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's see. Let's jump over to this one. I want to ask you a quick question, too. Can you outline some of the things that you've seen or some of the ways that you've seen tabletop RPGs build community? I think that's something that's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great example of this is a friend of mine named Josh Unruh. He has this game called the Heroes Guild, where he's actually taken a system called Powered by the Apocalypse, which is a super rules light, very story based game system, and he's made it appropriate for kids. And he runs this game for kids in after school programs and community centers. And his goal is basically to teach kids, one, teamwork and collaboration with each other, but two, like how to act heroic, how to be heroic people. And so that's really the best example I've seen of building community with role-playing games.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Actually, that's how I got into, like, even introduced to role-playing, is I was in an after-school program, and I wanted to do a math extracurricular, something to deal with math.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I asked my director, said, "Hey, I hear there's this kind of role playing stuff where you roll dice and you have to add stuff." She's like, "I love it." Now I never necessarily. I tried to work through it and kind of make it appropriate for kids, and so I never really got off the ground. But that was the whole point. Was that my children and I have actually played No Thank You Evil. Which is an amazingly great system for younger children. They precede a lot of really creative designs and stuff. But yeah, just to interact with kids and their imagination.
All right, we'll be right back after we hear a brief message from our sponsor.
We want to thank the sponsors of today's episode, our friends at Van Ryder Games.
Creators of award-winning games such as the single-player Hostage Negotiator and the One vs. Many Detective City of Angels.
You can find their full catalog of games, including their graphic novel adventures, at vanrydergames.com. That's VANRYDERGAMES.com, your FLGS, or wherever you buy your games online.
So to go back to that story that I mentioned earlier about playing role-playing games with my family, that was a really interesting experience because I didn't think my whole family would end up having fun playing D&D, but I was able to make it fun for everyone at the table. The genesis of this, my younger sister at the time, was dating a guy who was trying to pressure her into playing D&D with his group of friends.
Okay.
And she had always made fun of me for this, but one day she just texts me and goes, "I think I'm going to be playing an elven cleric in a D&D 5th edition game." And I'm just like, "You are what?"
Say, huh?
It's not something you just drop casually over Twiton.
Yeah.
When you started this whole and you said like your sister's boyfriend, I was like, please tell me that this is how like the first introduction of this guy to your family.
This actually was the first time I met him.
I love it. That is the greatest thing ever. I think I'm gonna do that with my boys and their girls. If they ever bring them home for like dates, I'll be like, okay, hey everyone, before you go out, we're gonna sit and play D&D.
Boys, I'm sorry.
Instead of cleaning a shotgun, you just be like, roll for initiative.
Yeah, roll for initiative.
Oh, can I be the uncle cleaning the shotgun? Oh wait, hold on. You have boys.
I see your charisma is a -6. Remember that. Sleight of hand, -1,000.
But I was not going to let this upstart guy I didn't know be the first person to introduce my sister to the world of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not having that. I'm going.
Good brother.
I will
Good
do
brother.
this.
Yes, sir. Good brother. I understand.
And so I messaged him and I was like, "Hey, I want to introduce Katie to the world of Dungeons and Dragons. I know you've played. My wife has played. Let's do like a small session. I'll run it to just kind of, introduce her to the world." And he goes, "All right, cool." And so I put together this session that is going to speak to my sister's interests.
That's really smart. Yeah.
So I create basically the D&D version of The Bachelor.
Oh my gosh.
There is a prince who, he's a bachelor. He is looking for his future queen, and he has put out a call to all of the surrounding lands. And at the same time, the party, which consisted of my sister, her boyfriend, my wife, and then my older sister, wanted in on this.
Love it.
Even though, again, had expressed no interest at all in
Love
playing
it.
D&D. My dad gets wind of this and he wants in because my dad has always been curious about D&D the same way I have.
Okay.
And so I thought it would be interesting to let him play.
Chip
and then
off the old block.
Mom goes, well, if everyone else is playing, then I'm playing too. And so we're at the table playing the fantasy version of The Bachelor, but this party, they had been tasked by this secret organization that they were a part of. The prince, his castle is built on top of this wizard's crypt. There's a spell book that enemies of the society are trying to get a hold of. So they're going to use this competition as cover, sneak down there, and find that thing before the enemy finds it. And so by day, again, we have D&D Bachelor going on, and the female characters are all participating in this competition for the prince's hand. And by night, they're sneaking down underneath the castle to find the spell book. And what they find is not only is the enemy looking for it, but the enemy's a beholder. My favorite D&D monster.
Well, of course.
Oh my gosh. You know what I love?
Love it.
I love that in Big Trouble Little China that a beholder shows up.
Yeah,
You know,
essentially.
And you're just like, I've seen that guy before. And you're not as weirded out when that shows up. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
you got to tell us, how did that end?
Well, I mean, I want to say it's taking everything that I have not to make a fantasy suite joke. So, but I'll just
hold it in.
It's right here.
So how did that end, man? How did it end up? How did it go?
So ultimately, at the end of it, it turned out that the prince had no idea what was going on as far as the spell book underneath his castle. So he ends up helping them out, and because the player characters are the finalists for his hand.
Even your dad?
No, my dad and my sister's boyfriend, they had infiltrated as like security, basically.
Oh my goodness.
And so while the competition was going on, my dad was wandering around trying to find a way down into the crypt.
That is so cool.
And my sister's boyfriend was playing a Way of the Drunken Fist monk, so he was trying to find the alcohol. But
so cool.
Ultimately, at the end, everyone had a good time. Even my mom enjoyed herself in spite of not really understanding what was going on the whole time. It came down to one final dice roll, who won the prince's hand, and I'm accused of fixing the results to this day because my wife ended up winning. But everyone had a good time.
I love it.
And at some point, I think I'll be able to get them back around the table for
That's
another
wonderful.
session.
That's wonderful.
Super awesome. Very, very cool. So I've got one more for you here. So this is the big one. Where can our listeners find you, and can they either follow you or run a game with you, or how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, actually, take some time to talk about what you're doing.
Yeah, so the best place to find me is if you go to Twitter or Instagram. I am at Howard_Ryan Gregg. And on Instagram, you can actually see me paint miniatures. That's my favorite platform.
Oh, we need to talk.
Yeah, because I love painting miniatures.
Oh, we need to talk.
That's one of my favorite things to do is painting miniatures.
Contact Ryan to paint miniatures. Okay, I'm back. I'm with you now. Okay.
But as far as my show, Rollin Bones with Ryan Howard is available on YouTube. If you just look up Rollin Bones, no G, make sure there's an apostrophe after the N in Rollin.
Let's do that right.
That is my YouTube channel. Episodes go up there every Wednesday. If you want to watch along live and get the chance to ask me a question or one of my guests a question, I stream my show live on Monday nights at 8 p.m. Central at twitch.tv/Ryan Rollin Bones Ryan. And lastly, if you don't like watching interviews or anything like that on YouTube, you're on the go a lot, we do have an audio-only version that also comes out on Wednesdays. It's available on all major podcatchers. Just look for Rollin Bones Ryan on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Anchor. It's all there.
Super duper. Well, hey, man, we have gotten close to the end, but we always play a game. I'm curious how this one's going to go. I think we've already played it. I'm going to ask him the question, and if we've already played it, Alex is going to have to answer and give us his favorite RPG systems. But I'm going to ask you this question. Every time we have a guest on, we ask them a question. We do our list around here. We don't mess around with top 5s or top 10s. It's too many numbers. It's too many choices. We like to skim it down to the best of the best, so we only do the top 3, and they're not just good. They're super good. And so this is our top 3 favorite games, or should I say game systems, adventure board games that aren't based on D&D.
Top 5 adventure board games?
Top 3.
Top 3 adventure board games.
Yeah, your favorite. Not based on D&D.
Not based on D&D. All right. So.
He's going for it. Sweet.
Nice. Oh, that's exciting.
Super.
Most people, they're like, I would have never thought of that.
Not based on D&D. So would like a miniature skirmish game count?
Done.
Okay. So Marvel Crisis Protocol is a good one.
Cool. All right, let me...
You know what I just saw today? They actually just released a book, like an IP, based on the Marvel Crisis Protocol IP.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's got Miss Marvel on the cover.
Yeah.
All right. And so I will... You get a break because we're going to all participate. I'll give you my first one as soon as I find it in my notes. Here we go. My first one... mine, I'm going to go from bottom to top. So I'm going to start with number 3. My number 3 is Clank, which is a deck building adventure game. And that's by Paul Dennen, published by Renegade Game Studios, originally released in 2016. It's an adventure game. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, mine's Star Wars Imperial Assault.
That's your number 3?
No, no particular order.
Oh, yours in no particular. Okay.
Yeah, but Imperial Assault is... are you familiar with Descent at all?
Yes.
Okay, so they reskinned Descent, but in the Star Wars universe.
Gotcha.
It's fantastic.
And they go through all of the 3 mainline movies, so New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi.
I should play it with him. It's fantastic.
And then I'm actually playing with the boys as we speak.
It's so good.
And they love it.
It's so good.
They love it. And then there is the final expansion was actually it's set in the Rebels universe and Thrawn is the main bad guy.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah,
right.
so it's really cool.
Your second one, Mr. Ryan.
Second one. Again, I don't know if this fits the criteria, but Betrayal at the House on the Hill.
Absolutely fits.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, Betrayal is secretly a role-playing game.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, because when you turn the haunt over, and then you're like, I mean, then it's like sometimes you're like, I'm the villain. Eat it, everybody!
Yeah,
and you didn't even know it.
And it's actually listed in the adventure section on BGG.
I remember that was the first board game my wife played with my family back when we were still dating.
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up being the bad guy in the haunt.
Yeah.
And it was the haunt where someone turns into a dragon.
Of course it was. That is awesome.
And I had the highest strength, so I was the one who slayed the dragon.
And then he got down on one knee and proposed.
Right.
It's
Here's
like,
the ring. And with this rock.
With this rock, I slay you, dragon!
I love it. I love it. My number 2 is Mage Knight, the board game by Vlada Chavatil, published by WizKids and released in 2011. Just chunky, unbelievable goodness. You can sit that thing out in front of you, man, and the map grows as you expand it. You're flipping over tiles. And it's got a sideboard that's bigger than most games' whole board.
Yeah.
And it's chunky and fantastic.
It is not fantastic.
It is fantastic.
It is. It like chunky make me want to vomit.
It is in the top 10 on BGG for a reason.
Well, I know. I respect it.
It's not your type of game. I get
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
But
I respect it for everything that it does and does so well.
It's a super crunchy
so well.
board.
Yeah, but I didn't have the fun. The moment to moment piece of it was it was really kind of boring.
Oh, I love
but
it.
the grandiose nature of the story that it actually is able to tell is pretty cool.
So good.
My number 2, well, it's not even a number 2, it's just general. I'm gonna have to say Gloomhaven because I think
I knew that was coming.
Well, but I mean, what it did was the actual moment, like the gameplay of the card system that it does was so unique and really, really clever. but then just how it builds and genuinely morphs into different things and what you can explore.
It's the definition of the question, so yeah.
Yeah. And so, it is not for everyone. It is not for everyone because I know, like, you know why Cephalophore Games is on the map? Is because everybody thought that they could finish it. You know how I bet you 1 in 20 has actually finished that entire campaign. Because it's 100 hours in a box.
It really is.
I mean, it is a a 1 to 2 year session for most gaming groups.
A regular meeting.
Yes, and I would have to say that most gaming groups who got into that did not realize the time commitment that was going to be associated with it.
Yeah.
So, which I think is a bit of a sad piece for it. So.
Super cool. Your third one, sir.
My third one, I'm going to go with Elder Sign, which anyone who doesn't know about it, if you've ever heard of Arkham Horror, it's like Arkham Horror. It's Lovecraftian. It's that same universe, but it doesn't take you half a day to set up and then 3 more days to play.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's a very quick kind of version of
just rolling
Arkham
dice.
That is a fantastic list. My number one, Alex knows this one. You want to say it? The adventure game that's not D&D. It's Roombound 2nd edition.
Oh, yeah.
This one was originally designed by Daryl Hardy and Martin Wallace. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Remember, this was one of the first board games I ever bought when I was married.
Yeah, and of course, this was published by Fantasy Flight Games way back when. I won't say anything else. Released originally in 2005, and it is. I mean, it's older in terms of, I don't want to use clunky or kludgy, but it's got 2005 mechanics.
Yep.
So mechanically speaking, it doesn't, even its third ed is obviously more streamlined, but it's just such a good adventure. I mean, you set out on that stupid board, man, and you got those markers, and you got the deck of all the markets on the side with all the stuff in it. I own all but 2 of the original character decks because they released character decks where you could start with individual characters, and it's like, oh, I can be this person. And it was just such an adventure. I remember being so impressed by it. And the last time I played it, which now hasn't been a little bit over a year ago, I mean, the same feeling came back. I'm like, I've played Sword and Sorcery. I've got some other stuff now that's more modern. I don't know if it's going to hold up. And within 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, see, I love this game. This is great. As old as it is, it's just fantastic. So yes, Runebound, 2nd ed. Your number one, sir, or your next one.
Number one, and this is one that I have seen, and I'll also be honest, I've never played it. But it's one that I have seen and I've wanted to for so long. But Mice and Mystics, I think setting and story and length it's just really.
I've heard amazing things.
Yeah, really, really cool.
Super cool. That's a super cool list. Well, Mr. Ryan, we want to thank you for coming and hanging out with us. And we can mention it, but we weren't going to get into it because we're going to talk about it in other places. But we are currently in the game that we've mentioned that Alex and I are playing. Ryan is playing with us. He's in that one with us. So look forward to that.
He is literally the highlight of this entire session.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, so you will listen to that for Ryan and his awesome character.
Yes. And so
and the last session, he threatened to kill me.
Look forward to that.
Which actually, Larry, I think every session threatened to kill me.
Look forward to that, guys. There's definitely something to look forward to, Ryan. We want to thank you for coming and hanging out with us, man, and spending some time with us. Hey, I said when we set this up that we were going to do a home and home. So we're just waiting on the invite, and we're coming. We'll be on your show, man.
Absolutely. Anytime you guys want.
Absolutely. We'll absolutely do it. So for the Spoken Token, this is Larry Neal saying keep communicating.
Hey, and this is Alex Wallace saying keep playing. This has been the Spoken Token Podcast. If you'd like to interact with us, please contact us through email at thespokentokenpodcast@gmail.com, on Instagram at The Spoken Token Podcast, on Twitter at The Spoken Token, or on Facebook at The Spoken Token Podcast. And you can reach us through our BGG Guild, number 2656.
You are listening to a Pod Studio One Podcast Network podcast. Find more great podcasts at www.podstudio1.com.